World War III medical preparedness comes down to 10 items, and I guarantee you own none of them. Your wife just caught a 9mm fragment in the brachial artery from stray fire. She's got maybe 2 minutes before exsanguination. Your $100 tactical first aid kit contains adhesive bandages, gauze squares that soak through instantly, medical tape, ibuprofen, and an emergency blanket. 0 hemorrhage control, 0 hemostatic capability. She bleeds out on your kitchen floor in 90 seconds while you press useless cotton against a severed artery. The preparedness industry sold you theater. They need you calling 911, riding $15,000 ambulances, generating revenue. But military medics stop arterial bleeds in 30 seconds with a $25 tourniquet. They pack wounds with $40 hemostatic gauze that forces clotting in 60 seconds. 10 items total. You can buy them today. Nobody's going to tell you where. Every prepper I know has a first aid problem. They don't know it yet, but they do. You've got a medical kit. Probably bought it on Amazon. Maybe it's an Adventure Medical Kits trauma pack, or a MyMedic MyFac, or one of those red nylon pouches with the white cross that screams tactical preparedness. It cost you $60 to $100. It's sitting in your truck or your bug-out bag, or mounted on your plate carrier with molly straps. You think you're ready for medical emergencies. You're not. You're carrying camping supplies marketed as combat medicine. And when the shooting starts, when the artillery lands, when WW3 turns your neighborhood into a free fire zone, that kit will get someone killed. Here's what's actually inside that tactical medical pouch. Adhesive bandages in assorted sizes. Gauze pads, the kind that soak through in seconds under pressure. Medical tape, antiseptic wipes, maybe some ibuprofen or acetaminophen. An emergency blanket, tweezers, a pair of scissors. If you spent extra, maybe an Israeli bandage you've never practiced applying. These items treat paper cuts, blisters, minor burns, headaches, splinters. World War III doesn't give you splinters. WW3 gives you arterial hemorrhages from shrapnel, penetrating torso trauma from rifle rounds, sucking chest wounds from blast fragmentation, traumatic amputations from IEDs, third-degree burns from thermobaric weapons, compound fractures from building collapses. And here's the number that should wake you up. In modern combat zones, 50 to 60% of preventable battlefield deaths are from hemorrhage. Not from the injury being too severe. From bleeding that could have been stopped, but wasn't. The U.S. military did extensive studies in Iraq and Afghanistan. They found that soldiers were dying from extremity wounds, limb injuries that should have been survivable, because hemorrhage control wasn't applied fast enough or correctly. The timeline is brutal. Arterial bleed from the femoral artery, you've got about 30 seconds before unconsciousness from blood loss. 2 to 3 minutes until death. Brachial artery in the arm, maybe 4 minutes. Carotid in the neck, you're looking at under a minute. Your $80 tactical first aid kit has absolutely nothing that stops arterial bleeding. No tourniquet, no hemostatic agent, no pressure dressing designed for high-flow trauma. You've got cotton squares and adhesive strips. You're not building medical capability. You're building a graveyard with red crosses on the boxes. The preparedness industry sold you comfort. They sold you items that make you feel ready without actually preparing you for the injuries that kill. Because the items that actually save lives, the ones that stop hemorrhage in 30 seconds, that prevent infection in grid-down scenarios, that manage pain when there are no hospitals, those items are kept in a completely different channel. Not illegal, just invisible. And there's a reason for that. The Israeli Defense Force did a study after analyzing combat casualties from 2006 to 2014. They looked at every soldier who died from extremity hemorrhage, limb wounds that bled out. The finding was brutal and simple. If a tourniquet was applied within 1 minute of injury, survival rate for arterial bleeds was over 90%. Without a tourniquet, death occurred in an average of 3 minutes. 3 minutes. That's the window. A tourniquet is the simplest piece of medical technology that exists. It's a strap with a windlass rod. You wrap it around the limb above the injury site. You tighten the windlass until blood flow stops completely. You lock it in place. Done. Arterial hemorrhage controlled. The bleeding stops. It can be self-applied, one-handed. A soldier can put it on their own leg or arm while under fire. It requires about 30 seconds of training to use correctly. And once it's on, you've bought yourself hours. The limb stays viable for up to 2 hours under tourniquet, sometimes longer. Long enough to get to definitive care or handle the immediate crisis. There are 2 types that matter. The CAT, Combat Application Tourniquet, developed by Composite Resources for the U.S. military, and the SOF-TW, the Special Operations Forces Tactical Tourniquet, wide version. Both are approved by the Committee on Tactical Combat Casualty Care. Both have been tested on thousands of combat casualties. Both work. Cost: $25 to $35 per unit. That's it. For the price of a decent meal, you own a device that stops arterial bleeding in 30 seconds. So why isn't this in your first aid kit? Why isn't this in every home medicine cabinet in America? Why did you buy a $60 tactical medical pouch with band-aids and gauze instead of a $25 tourniquet that actually saves lives? Because if you can stop arterial bleeding in your garage, you're not calling 911. You're not riding in a $15,000 ambulance. You're not generating a $12,000 to $25,000 emergency room bill for hemorrhage control and trauma stabilization. The medical system doesn't profit from prevention. It profits from emergencies. Tourniquets are sold to military units, law enforcement, and EMS services. They're marketed to professionals. The consumer first aid market deliberately excludes them. Not because they're dangerous, not because civilians can't use them, because a population that can handle its own hemorrhage control is a population that doesn't need emergency medical services for traumatic bleeding. You can buy them right now. North American Rescue sells them. Tactical Medical Solutions. Amazon carries genuine CAT tourniquets for $30, but you won't see them advertised during prime time. You won't find them on the shelf at CVS next to the Band-Aids. The industry wants you dependent, not capable. But stopping the bleeding is only half the problem. In a prolonged WW3 scenario, infection kills more people than initial trauma. And here's where the medical establishment has built the most lucrative scam of all. Let's talk about the second most preventable death in combat medicine. Not all bleeding can be tourniqueted. A torso wound, penetrating trauma to the abdomen or chest, a neck injury, junctional hemorrhage in the groin where the leg meets the pelvis. You can't put a tourniquet on these areas. The anatomy doesn't allow it. This is where hemostatic agents become the difference between bleeding out and walking away. A hemostatic agent is a material that accelerates the body's natural clotting process. Your blood clots on its own through a cascade of chemical reactions involving platelets, clotting factors, and fibrin formation. But that process takes time. In a high-flow arterial or venous bleed, you don't have time. The blood volume loss happens faster than the clotting cascade can complete. Hemostatic agents cheat the timeline. There are 3 types that matter: quick clot combat gauze, kaolin-based; Salox, chitosan-based; and Hemcon bandages, mineral-based. All three work through slightly different mechanisms, but the goal is the same. Stop the bleeding in under 90 seconds. Quick Clot Combat Gauze uses kaolin, a natural mineral clay. When you pack this gauze into a wound, the kaolin creates a massive surface area for clotting factor activation. It concentrates the clotting components at the injury site and accelerates coagulation by up to 500% compared to standard gauze. You're compressing what would take 5 minutes into 60 seconds. Celox uses chitosan, derived from shrimp shells. It's a positively charged polysaccharide that binds to negatively charged red blood cells, independently of the normal clotting factors. This means it works even if the patient is on blood thinners like warfarin or aspirin. It works in hypothermic conditions when the body's normal clotting is severely impaired. You pack the wound, apply pressure for 3 minutes, and the bleeding stops. Hemcon bandages use a mineral-based chitosan variant. Similar mechanism, different formulation. The U.S. military made Quick Clot Combat Gauze standard issue in every IFAC, individual first aid kit, starting in 2008. After analyzing thousands of combat casualties in Iraq and Afghanistan, they found that hemostatic gauze reduced mortality from non-compressible hemorrhage by 20 to 30%. That's lives saved per 100 casualties just from one intervention. Cost? $25 to $50 per pack. You can pack a wound that would have killed someone in 3 minutes and stop the bleeding with a $40 piece of treated gauze. So why isn't this in your medicine cabinet? Why isn't this in every home first aid kit next to the Band-Aids and ibuprofen? Because a $40 pack of gauze that stops arterial bleeding in 60 seconds makes the $15,000 emergency room visit for hemorrhage control completely unnecessary. The medical system doesn't want you stopping your own bleeding. It wants you on a stretcher, in an ambulance, generating billable procedures. But now here's the uncomfortable question. If you've got tourniquets and hemostatics, if you can stop bleeding that would have killed you in minutes, what's your next limitation? The wound you treated with a tourniquet and hemostatic gauze, the one you successfully stopped from bleeding out, it's been 72 hours. The patient survived the initial trauma, but now the wound site is red, hot, swollen. The skin around the edges is starting to necrotize. Fever spikes to 102 degrees Fahrenheit. Sepsis is beginning. Without antibiotics, survival time is 3 to 5 days. Here's the historical reality. Before widespread antibiotic availability in the 1940s, 30% of combat deaths were from infection, not from the initial wounds. Soldiers survived the battlefield. They died a week later from sepsis, from gangrene, from wound infections that modern medicine treats with a 7-day course of pills. In modern warfare, infection causes less than 5% of combat deaths. Not because wounds are cleaner or soldiers are tougher, because of aggressive antibiotic protocols. Every combat medic carries antibiotics. Every field hospital has IV antibiotics. Infection gets treated immediately, prophylactically, before sepsis can take hold. In a grid-down WW3 scenario, with no hospitals, no pharmacies, no functioning medical infrastructure, infection mortality rates revert to the pre-antibiotic era. You survive the shrapnel. The infection kills you 6 days later. The problem is prescription gatekeeping. The FDA classifies antibiotics as prescription-only medications. You cannot legally stockpile them without a doctor's authorization. And doctors won't prescribe antibiotics for hypothetical future use. Liability issues. DEA scrutiny for controlled substances. Medical board regulations against prescribing without immediate medical necessity. You're locked out of the pharmaceutical system deliberately. But there's a loophole. and it's been hiding in plain sight for decades. Veterinary antibiotics, fish antibiotics, chemically identical to human pharmaceutical versions. Same active ingredients, same dosages, same pills, different label, sold over the counter for aquarium use and livestock treatment. No prescription required, no questions asked. Fish mox. That's amoxicillin 500 milligram capsules, the exact same antibiotic as human amoxil. Same manufacturer, in many cases, Thomas Labs, just packaged for fish tank use instead of human consumption. Fish flox, ciprofloxacin 500 milligram tablets, same as human cipro. Bird biotic, doxycycline 100 milligram capsules, same as human vibromycin. The dosages are identical. The chemical composition is identical. The FDA manufacturing standards are identical because these are produced in the same facilities that make human pharmaceuticals. The only difference is, the label says, for aquarium use only. Cost comparison. A 100-count bottle of fish mox, amoxicillin 500 milligram, runs $25 to $50 online. No prescription. No insurance needed. A 10-day course of human amoxicillin with insurance costs you a $30 copay. Without insurance, $200 or more at a pharmacy. This isn't illegal. It's a regulatory gray area. The FDA doesn't prohibit the sale of veterinary antibiotics. They just strongly discourage human consumption without veterinary oversight. But in a WW3 collapse scenario, when the pharmacies are burned and the hospitals are overwhelmed, regulatory discouragement doesn't matter. Survival does. But antibiotics only work if you know when to use them. And that's where the medical establishment's final barrier kicks in. They've conditioned you to be helpless without a doctor's permission. Here's what every field medic knows, but no civilian gets taught. Wound infection protocols, specific antibiotics for specific scenarios, and you can learn the basics in 30 minutes. Soft tissue infection, puncture wound, deep laceration, any injury where bacteria gets introduced beneath the skin. The antibiotic of choice is amoxicillin clavulinate. That's the fish antibiotic equivalent of Augmentin. Broad spectrum coverage against staph, strep, and anaerobic bacteria. Dosage is 500 milligrams 3 times per day. Duration is 7 to 10 days depending on severity. Respiratory infection, pneumonia, bronchitis, anything compromising lung function. In a scenario where you're breathing smoke, or dust, or chemical particulates, azithromycin, that's the Z-Pack. Fish equivalent is often sold as fish zithro. 500 milligrams on day 1, then 250 milligrams daily for days 2 through 5. It's a macrolide antibiotic with good lung tissue penetration. Gastrointestinal infection, contaminated water, field expedient food sources, cholera, dysentery, anything causing severe diarrhea that will dehydrate and kill you. Ciprofloxacin, fish flox. 500 milligrams twice per day for 5 to 7 days. Fluoroquinolone class, effective against most waterborne bacterial pathogens. These protocols aren't complicated. They're not advanced medical science. Every military medic memorizes them in week 2 of training. But you've never been taught this because the medical establishment maintains a knowledge monopoly. Doctors' income depends on gatekeeping treatment. If you can diagnose a soft tissue infection and treat it with amoxicillin from your stockpile, you're not paying for an office visit. You're not paying for a prescription. You're not generating revenue. Patient education reduces medical dependency, and dependency is profitable. Now let's talk about pain management, because ibuprofen doesn't cut it for traumatic injuries. Acetaminophen and ibuprofen are fine for headaches. They're useless for a compound fracture or a second-degree burn. You need opioid-class pain relief. And here's where the gray area gets darker. Tramadol. It's a synthetic opioid, Schedule IV controlled substance in human medicine, but it's available as veterinary medication for pet pain management. 50 milligram tablets. Effective for moderate to severe pain without the respiratory depression risk of morphine or fentanyl. You can function on tramadol. You can think. You just don't feel the pain as acutely. Ketamine. Veterinary sedative. Used in every field hospital for pain control during procedures. It provides dissociative anesthesia. The patient is conscious but detached from physical sensation. It's increasingly stockpiled in preparedness communities because it's one of the few field-usable anesthetics that doesn't require intubation support. The legality here is murky. Possessing veterinary medications without livestock isn't technically illegal. Using them for human consumption violates FDA guidelines, but isn't a criminal offense in most jurisdictions. In a WW3 collapse, when the rule of law is secondary to survival, these legal nuances become irrelevant. Now let me show you how this all fits together. Hemorrhage control, infection prevention, pain management. You've got the critical three. But there are 7 more items that complete the system. And when you see the full list, you'll understand the pattern. Here's what it comes down to. 10 items. Total cost, $400 to $600. Total knowledge transfer, 8 hours of basic study. This is the medical kit that keeps you alive when the hospitals burn down. 1. Cat tourniquet. Buy 2. Arterial hemorrhage control for extremity wounds, $30 each. North American Rescue or Tactical Medical Solutions. This is the single most important item on the list. 2. Quick clot combat gauze. Hemostatic agent for wounds you can't tourniquet. Torso injuries, junctional bleeds, neck trauma. $40 per pack. Z-Medica makes the military version. 3. Chest seals. 2 pairs, Ventide. For sucking chest wounds, penetrating thoracic trauma, any injury where air is entering the chest cavity and collapsing the lung. $30 for a pair. Hyphen or Bolin brand. 4. Nasopharyngeal airway, also called an NPA. Flexible tube that goes through the nose to maintain an open airway when the patient is unconscious or has facial trauma. $8. Any medical supply company. 5. Fish antibiotic kit. Amoxicillin, doxycycline, ciprofloxacin. Covers soft tissue infections, respiratory infections, gastrointestinal pathogens. Roughly $100 for a comprehensive supply. Thomas Labs, Fish Biotic, available online. 6. Irrigation syringe. 60 cc capacity with catheter tip. For wound cleaning, flushing debris and contamination before closure. $5. This prevents infection better than any topical antibiotic. 7. Israeli bandage. Emergency pressure. Dressing with built-in pressure applicator. For hemorrhage control on wounds where tourniquets won't work, but hemostatics aren't necessary. $10. Standard IDF equipment since the 1990s. 8. Trauma shears. For cutting away clothing to access wounds. You cannot treat what you cannot see, and in trauma scenarios, you don't have time to gently remove shirts. $12. Any paramedic supply store. 9. Nitrile gloves. Box of 100. Infection control. Bloodborne pathogens are real, and in a collapse scenario without post-exposure prophylaxis available, you cannot afford contamination. $15. 10. Tramadol, or veterinary pain management. $50 to $100, depending on source and legality comfort level, for pain control during treatment and recovery from traumatic injuries. Total cost, approximately $450. Compare that to the typical consumer tactical first aid kit, $80 to $150. Contains band-aids, gauze pads, antiseptic wipes, maybe some ibuprofen. Zero hemorrhage control capability. Zero hemostatic agents. Zero airway management. Zero real trauma medicine. Notice what's not on this list. Band-aids, Neosporin, ACE bandages, cold packs. Those are comfort care items. They treat minor injuries that won't kill you. This list treats the injuries that will. This is trauma medicine. This is battlefield capability. And every single item is legal, available, and purchasable right now. So why don't you already own this? Look at the list again. Not one item requires a prescription, if you know where to look. Everything here is proven, tested, used by militaries worldwide. Why didn't anyone tell you this exists? Let's talk about why a $450 medical kit that handles 90% of battlefield trauma is kept out of civilian hands while a $15,000 ER visit is the only advertised option. This is the pattern. Watch closely. The medical system is built on emergency response, not preparedness. Hospitals generate revenue from trauma treatment. Emergency departments, surgical interventions, ICU admissions. Insurance companies profit from premiums, not from preventing claims. Pharmaceutical companies profit from prescription gatekeeping, not from accessible stockpiles that you control. A civilian who can handle hemorrhage control, infection management, and pain relief at home is a civilian who doesn't generate revenue. You're not a patient. You're a profit center. And medical preparedness makes you worthless to the system. Here's the proof. The American Red Cross used to teach tourniquet application in civilian first aid courses. Standard training in the 1970s and 1980s. Tourniquets were considered basic emergency care. Then in the 1990s, they removed it from the curriculum. Quietly. No announcement. No explanation. The official reason, given years later, was risk of improper application causing limb damage. The real reason was liability concerns and revenue protection. If civilians could handle arterial hemorrhage at home, ER visits for traumatic bleeding would drop. Ambulance transports would decrease. Hospital trauma departments would lose admissions. That's billions in lost revenue across the healthcare industry. So tourniquets stayed in the military and law enforcement channels. Kept professional, kept away from you. Every item on the 10-item list exists in the professional military channel, deliberately. Not banned, just obscure. Hidden behind industrial supply catalogs and tactical medical distributors that don't advertise to consumers. But you can access all of it right now. Tactical Medical Solutions, North American Rescue, Chinook Medical. These companies have been supplying the U.S. military for decades. They sell direct to civilians, no credentials required. Amazon carries cat tourniquets and quick clot combat gauze. Fish antibiotics are available from Thomas Labs, Fish Biotic, any aquarium supply site. For training, YouTube has comprehensive resources. Skinny Medic and Prep Medic run channels specifically for civilian tactical medicine. The book, Special Operations Forces, Medical Handbook, is available as a PDF. It's the field manual used by U.S. Special Forces medics. You can download it tonight and start studying. Total investment, $450 for supplies, 8 hours for basic protocol knowledge. That's what stands between you and battlefield medical capability. The medical system doesn't want you capable. It wants you dependent. It wants you helpless, without their permission, their infrastructure, their billing codes. But hemorrhage doesn't wait for insurance authorization. Infection doesn't care about prescription laws. Arterial bleeding stops when pressure's applied, not when a doctor gives permission. Stay prepared. Stay independent. Trauma doesn't negotiate.